Hello there everyone, this is Mr. Brass, and today I'll be going over the handicap match between Shannon Q and King Crocoduck versus Friended Forever. For heads up, I'm just going to disable the ratings here, and I will start doing that with all my response videos to Atheist. Atheist will inevitably respond, misrepresent me, and will sick their fans to the video, who won't actually watch the video but will just downvote right away and repeat what their Atheist master said. But anyway, let's get into the video.
World, and just if we look at it objectively, just counting membership, I would have, if we're judging ethical systems by their ability to attract and maintain members, I would say Christianity has secular humanism beat by.
But do you feel that that's a valid way to judge ethical systems? Just
no,
you know,
I would argue that we should judge ethical systems the same way you're proposing that we judge ethical systems, rationally, based on.
I dispute the whole notion of reason being used in ethical systems because it ultimately gets into the point of whose reason are we using to judge these ethical systems with, and what is the criteria we are using to judge them. I mean, generally a lot of people believe that human flourishing is the goal we should be aiming for, but what they fail to understand is that there are competing and contradicting versions of how to get human flourishing. People have wrongly used science, and you could say in part secular values, in order to justify their racism and their eugenic practices, in the belief that it would lead to human flourishing. Nikola Tesla and H.G. Wells have both been called humanists, and they both use science as a basis for their support of eugenics, on the idea that it would be better for humans. The ability to market your ethical system is definitely a helpful feature, because if you ultimately can't get people to join it, then that would say something about your ethical system in terms of its ability to bind people to a system of ethics.
I don't think that you or me would argue that in any given religion, and specifically in Christianity, you can look at the book itself or the tenets of the religion and say, you know, in whole cloth, all of this is good. It's clearly subjective. It's very interpretive. I mean, you can find one passage that says something in the Bible and then flip a couple pages and find something that says the opposite, right? So ultimately, it's human interpretation that creates the applied ethic of the common culture. So that. My question to you would be, if you're pulling out components and it's a subjective analysis, what about the religion itself is supporting that ethic, as opposed to the ethic being an emergent property of the current culture and being found within the religion? Because really, you can find anything in there if you look hard enough.
While human interpretation does go into reading the Bible, it is also important to know that scholarship is important into discerning the actual meaning of these passages, and it is possible to have a bad interpretation. The good thing about religion over secular values in this regard is in the dogma and tenets, because they provide a framework which, unlike the other ones I've seen proposed by atheists, comes down to being more than just an admittance that people arbitrarily make up moral guidelines. I also don't see how having loads of interpretations is really much of a problem when this could be said about secular humanism or really any ideology, because interpretation goes into it, and you can pull whatever you want out of an ideology if you try hard enough. Being open to interpretation doesn't mean that it is unreliable or that it can't be a basis for society, but rather it just means we have more to learn on the subject. Also, this goes against the notion of religion being constraining, which I will go into more later. Now, while it is true that the environment plays a part in developing a system of ethics, one can easily say that Christianity, at least, provides a moral framework, and it gives social animals a discernible ethical system to come about in any environment, and that without Christianity or belief in God in general, this moral framework could disappear. Christianity has proven to be very flexible, as it has survived almost every type of government and an environment you can put it on, save, you know, some communist and Islamic regions. This notion of environment to religion just sees a one-way causality where religion is shaped by society, but not the other way around, which is historically dishonest as that has occurred. Also, when we look at the data, we'd like to see the track record of religion and see historically what benefits it has produced just by it existing, and we reveal shocking data. French philosopher Alain de Benoist, in his book Beyond Human Rights, points out that the notion of human rights came from Christianity and didn't exist prior to it in the lands. John Sommerville, in his book The Decline of Secular Christianity, shows that societies before Christianity were more honor-based. Even liberalism is argued to stem from Christianity. Shannon is a big supporter of inductive reasoning, which while I have some problems with it, I do think it is a good habit method. And simply put, when we look at the reproductive benefits of religion along with the scientific studies of Michael McCall, added with general history, I find there's a lot of compelling evidence for friended side.
So that's one
within
level.
their in-group.
Within their in-group, exactly. And there is the between-group conflict that is an issue. And
Yeah.
I would argue that now we're jumping to the level of the memes. Like in the level of the memes, we want one of our memes. We've only chosen, we're only allowing ourselves 3, but I think one of those memes should have something to do with mitigating between group conflict. Obviously, you're bringing it up, so you think between group conflict is something the meme should mitigate, right?
Sure, but I mean, can you think of an existing religion that does mitigate? Like, it seems like since we're compartmentalizing portions of a religion, it's almost like we're saying, okay, well, this works in this religion and this works in that religion, and we think subjectively from an external perspective that all these things are beneficial. You would almost have to construct a new religion based on the components of all existing religions.
Define group conflict. If you mean groups disagreeing with one another because of their beliefs, then that is not really a helpful thing to bring up because people generally can't come to a consensus on anything, whether it is on matters of religion or not. If you mean like hostility towards each other, like for example killing each other or taking each other's rights, then one has to bring politics into this as well because that is inevitably going to be a factor. The difference between secular humanism and the Abrahamic religions in terms of breaking up group conflict is that Abrahamic traditions all have long-lasting and strong principles that they are expected to follow that were not always intuitive to the time frame they were located at, while secular humanism relies more on flawed human rationality based ultimately on loose and seemingly intuitive principles for their time frame, in which they are not united on, and as atheist philosopher John Gray points out, have its origins in Christianity. To give an example of religions promoting values to help mitigate conflicts, Islam gives about 10 rules of war that are ideal to follow by before engaging in war and allows non-Muslims to live under them with attacks. Jews have about 6 from what I can tell, and we're told in Exodus 23:9 not to oppress foreign residents. And Christianity, since it originated by a Jewish rabbi who was killed by the government, we don't really get much war commands from him, although what followed from Christianity was just war rules, which were summarized in pages 120 through 121 of War for Christian Views, which gives 7 principles from what Jesus taught. Jesus also taught to love enemies and to pray for those who persecute you, which goes a long way towards helping mitigate violence. Also, on a more common sense level, religions are pretty much required to have teachings about how to treat out-group people. If they didn't, how could they successfully proselytize? Under a secular humanist worldview, what ultimate justification can be given for keeping to rules that mitigate group conflicts, and not just trying to take over for the betterment of humanity? Survival of the fittest can easily be used as a rational basis on such a worldview, and thus mitigating group conflicts could be thrown out the window under that worldview.
Begins to emerge. They see all the problems that come from religion. I think both of us recognize a lot of these problems, but unless some alternative is developed, we have to recognize the function that religion plays. We have to recognize the sort of social role, the positive social mechanisms that follow from religious belief. And if we can find some secular substrate to act as an alternative to it, and potentially replace it, and one that lacks all of the bullshit baggage, without the supernatural baggage, without the sectarian violence, without all of this nonsense, you manage to create something like that and show that it's capable of functioning, then yeah, then anti-theism, the anti-theists would have it.
Right.
That's right.
Well, I'm encouraging people to put their ethical system forward, but as of now, what I see a lot of is just intuitive
So your
ethics.
answer is essentially, if you can't propose the penultimate ethical system to me in this conversation, then your position.
Really, this whole thing treats religion as if it is some political system that we sort of just tolerate for now until we can find some system that can do what we want it to do. No evidence has really been given for anti-theism, so I do believe King Croc and Shannon are relying on the atheist definition of faith here. In fact, they aren't putting an ethical system forward, but rather they're just saying they don't really know their ethical system, or even have a concept of what one looks like. Anti-theists don't really get that they are the ones pushing an idea and have to back it up. A majority of people on this planet are an anti-theist for very solid personal reasons. Now, does this mean they are right? No, but it does show that there is a consensus in that unless anti-theists have some alternative ethical system, or alternative in general that can match religion as it is, it should be assumed that it should still be in place as it is. I also like to remind them that the absolute worst ethical system is still better than no ethical system at all, and so far anti-theism have not met their burden of proof on the matter in terms of providing an ethical system. Shannon and Croc are sort of like the guys that go and say, hey, we can replace the political system we have now with a better one. And when you ask them, what exactly would this better political system be like? How would it function? How would it run? Etc. They just give you that 1,000-mile stare because they have no idea. They just want to complain about the current system without putting any actual mental work into how trying to understand it and actually making one.
So essentially my position is that we'd be better without religion. And by virtue of that, I don't think that it should be imposed on anybody that they should or should not be religious. I think it's a personal choice. It would ultimately be my ideal that people didn't have supernatural beliefs and were not constrained by the tenets of religious ideology. However, I would personally fight and have to ensure somebody's right to be religious, but that right ends where my rights and the common rights begin. You know, it's a personal choice. Whatever you'd like to do in your own home, in your own time, within your own church, within your own community, you have absolutely a right to, and I would never interfere with that.
I do honestly like Shannon, but she really doesn't seem to get that any group that hopes to survive is going to need to control its members' behavior to some extent. That is what these tenets do in religion. They constrain in terms of behavior and control. They provide a framework and a state of mind in which people can bond together and interact. Also, like I said before, it must be noted, it's funny how religion is accused of constraining people to a schema, while at the same time being accused of being too open to interpretation. Well, if everyone has a different interpretation of reality based on principles found in the Bible, then where's the constraint? If there was only one way to read the Bible and that specific way was enforced, then the constraint would be obvious to see, but we don't live in such a world. To get moron groups needing to control behavior, as stated on page 124 of the Introduction to Sociology by Henry L. Tischler, for groups to function properly, aka whether on a primary or secondary level, the following 6 things must be established. 1. Define their boundaries. 2. Choose leaders. 3. Make decisions. 4. Set goals. 5. Assign tasks. And 6. Control members' behavior. Atheism or anti-theism in of itself lacks all ability to fulfill these roles, as you really can't accomplish these sets on anything more than a dislike for religion and not being convinced of a religion. Many atheist groups also refuse to control their members' behavior or to promote that because they don't want to seem dogmatic or religiously minded, end quote. But this dogma per se is what binds people and makes a group able to be bound. As atheists often point out, there really is no group norms or guides under which you can take atheism/anti-theism under. And if Atheism Plus is any indication, along with the multiple atheist political groups on YouTube, once you try to make atheism more than a lack of belief and have any sort of group function, you get bad results and infighting, as terminology, norms, values, etc. are not clearly defined or agreed upon, and it's not because they're open for interpretation, as there was nothing there to begin with to interpret. With religion at least, there's at least something to interpret, while in atheism there isn't even that. While there is obviously infighting in religious groups, the fact there are these tenets and factors that go into it helps really establish limits to behavior. As it currently stands, atheism/anti-theism groups don't have the proper group function, ethical philosophy, motivation, or driving factors to help make them survive.
We're
I've already
privileged
said
enough to have this discussion here because the religion is an innocuous one, because the society itself is secular. It hasn't been allowed.
But there is something.
I do love how Shannon conflates secular with good and being allowed to have dialogue with non-believers. Please know, it's a good thing that I'm living in America and not places like North Korea or under any currently atheistic communist regime. If I were, then there also atheist dictators would, because solely of my beliefs and what I say, they would likely jail me, treat me as mentally ill, and or perhaps kill me in the name of secular values. Separating church from state is open to interpretation as well, with some interpreting it as meaning separating by threat of a gun. Two can play the oppressed victim narrative here.
Religious justification for it.
There's an objectively religious justification for forgiving people. There's an objectively religious justification for monogamy.
That forgiving somebody is good and slaveholding is bad.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
But through religious justification, at one point in time,
religion
the culture thought slaveholding was good.
The whole Christianity justified slavery argument. Look, contrary to popular opinion, the Abrahamic religions didn't invent slavery, and during the time of the early United States, it was a common practice done by many, regardless of religious beliefs. Many people justified slavery on secular grounds, saying that slaves were better off as slaves than as barbarians in their own native lands, and overall said that some people were just meant to be slaves. Also, many fought for slavery over cultural grounds and for economic reasons. It's sad to say, but slavery was seen as a great business investment back then, because it's a one-time payment that you'll get back and more over time. With Christianity's history on it, guys like William Webb's in his book Corporeal Punishment in the Bible shows it was really the fundamentalists that were pro-slavery and not the more scholarly ones like William Wilberforce, who helped end slavery and demolished pro-slavery arguments from the fundamentalists. The apostolic constitutions showed that Christians were in the business of gathering funds to set slaves free, and Robin Lane's book, Pagans and Christians, makes clear that while not specifically told to release slaves, the ones that did release slaves the most were Christians in ancient times. This has to do with the fact that everyone was seen as one under Christ, from the master to the slave, which undermined the dehumanization that goes into owning slaves.
To everybody. It's also starting to justify things like miseducation. It's starting to justify things like people not wanting to give equal rights to people who are homosexual, or there was somebody on a stream that I spoke to the other day that said that they wanted to have it legal to stone homosexuals. There are places where it is because of religion.
Starting to justify things like young earth creationism and homosexual bashing is ancient traditions. Personally, in regards to same-sex marriage, I'm all for getting the government completely out of the marriage business. Also, isn't it very well possible that atheists are just using a selection bias when dealing with the homosexuality issue? Why don't they talk to China, who according to the nestpig.com's article, Best LGBT Cities 2017, is currently the worst place for gay people to be? Or why not the less religious South Korea and Russia, all of whom have said society shouldn't accept homosexuality? So it seems like religion isn't the only component in this, but what possibly is? Well, according to a paper by David Pensoff and Marty Hazelton entitled The Effect of the Promiscuity Stereotype on the Opposition to Gay Rights, it shows promoting sexually conservative mating strategies plays a role in it. It shows how when people see gay people as promiscuous, that it makes them more opposed to them. In the paper, it goes into how the primary function of religious institution across cultures is to facilitate sexually conservative mating strategies, which homosexuality is seen to undermine. It also explains the other two factors of anti-gay attitudes, aka higher disgust sensitivity and limited contact with gay people, by showing how it is done to propagate these sexually restricting mating strategies.
Continue being subjected to bullshit, and the end result of this is you have a more stable society.
Yeah, that's the point, to have a stable society. What are the other end of that pendulum is chaos, anarchy.
I think our existing infrastructures would decline to a large degree if religion lessened completely, due to the fact that religion has the financial backing along with having the huge number of services that arguably can't be fulfilled outside of it. I recommend just seeing religion as a big corporation and see who its competitors are and how they stack up to it. Anti-theists are like the type of people who say if we just remove Disney, the existing structures we have would be able to sustain the function Disney has. Obviously, this has its flaws in reasoning. On a business level and on a functionalist sociological level, this form of argument is silly. Structural functionalism in sociology sees society as like a big machine and works to look at how in all of its parts and how they contribute to the machine. Given the history, social benefits, reproductive benefits, etc., all in religion, removing religion might completely throw a peg into the gears of the machine and dismantle it, so really any anti-religious ideology will have to assure that that wouldn't happen.
Okay, I believe that people would be better off without the constraint that's imposed upon them by religious ideologies. I think whenever I approach a decision in my life, I don't have a constraint. I don't have a scaffolding or an existing schema that I have to fit something with. I'm able to adapt my thinking based on new information without having to fit it into a mold. I think that's a component. I wish other people were free of that as well. I think that people should be able to choose whatever religion they want and exercise it with impunity, so long as it doesn't permeate society in a detrimental fashion. I think people should be able to make those choices for themselves. I understand that a part of their thinking is going to be determined by their religiosity. I wish it wasn't, because that can have, like I said, because of the pre-existing scaffoldings that we have, the schema that we have to conform to when we make ideas, not being constrained by having bad ones is good for everybody. I agree that perhaps I think that there are secular resources that can replace a lot of the things that we see within religion. I think that society itself, specifically here in Canada and in the United States, has created secular resources that allow that if we had religion removed from people, or if people choose to leave religion, they can still feel supported and be functioning within society and be a member of cohesive groups. And I think also that it's not true, and you shouldn't build a foundation on something that's not true. And I think that there are things that within it that you can build a very, very bad foundation on, and people demonstrate constantly that they can, and do.
Everyone is constrained to an extent by society and group functions. It is a needed thing for our species to survive. Also, we have cognitive biases. Admitting we do is the first step of doing any science. We like to think that we would change our beliefs based on evidence, but many times that isn't the case because of our emotional connection to something. That is all for the video, really. To be honest, I don't feel like this was a very productive conversation because it was more or less an hour and a half of arguing what is everyone's position. I'd recommend for future discussions for this to be laid out in advance and for everyone to argue their points consistently. I think the addition of King Crocoduck really didn't add much to the discussion, which, to be fair to King Crocoduck, he's a scientist and ethics could be going outside his field. I think Friendhead and Shannon had more chemistry in this, but I think with the the numbers game, not much could be done in getting this situation together. Well, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.